Yes.
I formally welcome everyone to the first day and the first session of the International Victimology Colloquium on Victim Empowerment through Legal and Social Initiatives. In the first session, we'll have a discussion on the topic Reparation for Victims of Cybercrimes. The speakers for the day are Professor Dr. Janice or Joseph, Vice President, World Society of Victimology, Professor Dr. Xin Ren, Professor, Division of Criminal Justice, California State University, Dr. Vipin Vijay Nair, Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean Academics, Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences. It is an honor to introduce our moderator for the day, Dr. Debarati Halder. She is presently working with the Parul Institute of Law, Parul University as a professor. She is the founder and honorary managing director of Center for Cyber Victim Counseling. Professor Debarati is the first law professor in India to introduce therapeutic jurisprudence as a subject in credit course to LLB students. She is also first in India to create a draft model law on prohibiting revenge porn, and the same has been shared with the National Commission for Women. She is the first in the world to author textbook on cyber victimology, and she has also won many awards. For example, Web Wonder Woman Award and the Tech Next India 2019 Best Faculty of the Year Award. It's an honor to have all of you in this session and looking forward to an interactive session today. Over to you, Debarati ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. And a very good morning to all of you, to the distinguished panelists. In this session, we are going to discuss about the reparation for victims of cybercrime. Victims of cybercrimes often face rejection at the initial stage of criminal justice system, that is with the police. Reason behind this is lack of awareness about the nature of the crime, less or nil laws for addressing the criminal activities and the punishment, jurisdictional issues, etc. Cybercrimes can be devastating, especially for the vulnerable victims, that is the women, children, senior citizens, and trans people. In this session, we will be discussing about reparation for such victims. It's my honor here to introduce the panelists, Professor Dr. Janice Joseph. Professor Joseph is a distinguished professor of criminal justice at the Stockholm University, New Jersey, USA, and one of the current vice presidents at the World Society of Victimology. Throughout her career, she has served as an advocate and activist for victims of gender-based violence. Professor Joseph has also been involved with numerous international organizations. For several years, Professor Joseph participated in the working group that drafted the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners, known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, which was adopted in December 2015 by the United Nations General. He was also elected 3 times as a member of the Executive Board of the International Scientific and Professional Advisory Council of the United Nations Crime Prevention and Crime Justice Programs, Milan, Italy. Professor Joseph is also a member of the Academic Council on the United Nations System and has served as the chair of the Working Party on Violence Against Women for the UN Institute. For her untiring and zealous work in this field, Professor Joseph has received several awards, such as Award for Outstanding Service at the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, ACJS, where she made history as first official UN NGO representative for the organization. We welcome Professor Joseph. Our next panelist is Professor Dr. Xin Ren, who is currently working as professor at the Division of Criminal Justice, California State University. She completed her bachelor's degree from People's University, China, Beijing, 1981. Her master's degree was from Ottawa University, and she also completed her PhD from the Pennsylvania University. Before joining the California State University, she has worked at Philadelphia Elder Abuse Task Force, Office of Public Defender, State of New Jersey, National Academy of Science, Washington, University of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and University of Pennsylvania. Equipped with more than 30 years of professional experience, she has worked extensively in the field of criminal law, juvenile justice, prostitution, and human trafficking. She has been listed as an eminent criminologist, educator by Marcus Group, and is also currently affiliated as a member of several international organizations like Chinese Society of Juvenile Delinquency Studies, the Chinese Society of Criminology, American Society of Criminology, International Society of Victimology, and many others. We have the third panelist as Dr. Vipin Nair. Before that, we extend a very warm welcome to Professor Xin Ren. Now to Dr. Vipin Nair. He is currently working as Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean at Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, OP Jindal Global University.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor Debarati. The voice quality at your end is not proper, ma'am. The voice is breaking.
I'm stopping my video so that you can hear me clearly.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. So, Dr. Nair is currently working as Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean at Jindal Institute of Behavioural Sciences, OP Jindal Global University. He was awarded a doctorate degree in 2021 from Jindal Institute of Behavioural Sciences, OP Jindal Global University, and he received his master's in criminology from LMJM, National Institute of Criminology and Forensic Science, GGSIP2, where he was awarded the University Silver Medal for his academic and research vigor. He has qualified UGC NET lecturership in criminology and FPAC certificate forensic psychology 2019 under Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. He is currently affiliated as Associate Editor with Association of Certified Fraud Examiner and Volunteer Educator with Professors Without Borders. Dr. Nair has completed many academic and individual research projects and is actively pursuing research in the field of victimology and criminology with active involvement in the Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies and Center for Criminology and Forensic Science at Jindal Institute of Behavioral Science, Jindal Global University. He is dedicated towards contributing interdisciplinary work in the field of victimology and criminology. He has presented in several international conferences, and also such organizations include World Society of Criminology, American Society of Criminology, British Society of Criminology, Indian Society of Criminology, etc. We welcome all the three panelists. And we start with Professor Janice Joseph. Professor Joseph.
Thank you very much. The ever-growing digital world we live in has created many new opportunities for criminals. Today, computers are small enough to be handled and be found in things we use every day, like automobiles and even refrigerators. According to Stata, there are more than 26.6 billion connected devices in use today. Experts predict that 7.5 billion devices will be connected by 2025. This connectivity creates a breeding ground for criminal activity that often goes undetected, as was indicated before. What is cybercrime? Cybercrime is a broad and imprecise concept according to the UNODC. There are often three categories of cyber crimes. First, crimes against computers implied the unauthorized access to the boundaries of computer systems, such as cyber trespassing or hacking. Then we have second, crimes using computer, often related to cyber-enabled crimes. And these are crimes that use information and communication technology to commit crimes such as identity theft, scams, and fraudulent use of credit cards online. Third, we have crimes in computers, where criminal content is the crime. Example, main content related to things like pornography, threats of violence, and terrorism. At present, there is no universal agreement on the classification type of cybercrime. Now, the United States is the world leader in cybercrimes. It has been the top affected country of the world in terms of internet-related crimes, with 23% of the world cyber crime rate. However, it is also the country with the strongest cyber laws in place. The first law that was passed, established in 1984, it was termed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Over and beyond this law, the United States has established strict definitions and punishment for cyber crimes, from penalties like crime misdemeanor from misdemeanor to felony, in cyberbullying to penalty of 15 years imprisonment and fines for identity theft. Millions of Americans are impacted by cyber crimes, but only approximately 15% of the victims report their crime to the FBI Crime Complaint Center. Now I want to focus on restitution, financial compensation for victims. Now, under the, and I'm focusing on the United States and Canada primarily, under the Identity Theft Enforcement and Restitution Act, it is now easier to prosecute, for prosecutors to go after cyber thieves responsible for identity theft. This federal law seeks to strengthen the efforts to prosecute identity theft while also improving restitution available to victims. The law also allows for restitution for victims of identity theft, both for the time and trouble the identity theft has caused them and for the actual amount of money lost due to identity theft. So this particular law focuses not just only how much money is lost, but also the time and energy and trouble that the person actually had to do to fix, to get things right. This act authorizing courts to issue restitution orders that require payments to the victim, not just for the actual cost, but also for the time they spent fixing the damage caused by the theft of the identity. So if they have to pay an attorney to get things straightened out, they have to find housing, etc. This particular act actually forces the criminal to pay restitution to the victim for those things, not just what he or she has lost, but also the other for inconvenience, put it that way. So that particular act, so that's one way the United States would get restitution, and it's, as you can see, it's very focused. It's on identity theft. So the victim, if they actually catch the perpetrator, the victim can get some restitution. Now, most of the cyber crimes in the United States are at the federal level. So they are basically tried in the federal court. In the federal courts, there is a mandatory restitution law for practically all the crimes that are tried in the federal courts. And so cybercrime falls under this as well, because it will be tried in the federal court. So in the federal court, a convicted offender may be ordered to reimburse victims of financial losses incurred due to the offender's crime, and it may order for the person for lost income, property damage, counseling, funeral costs, etc. To determine the amount of restitution to be ordered, the U.S. Probation Office gathers financial loss information from investigation. Often this information is determined by what we call a victim impact statement, where the victim would actually go to the court and discuss the impact of the crime on him or her. And the way it is in the United States, that has to be included. The restitution has to be included in the victim impact statement. So when the victim is reading his or her impact statement, the victim has to say exactly how much restitution they would like, and they also have to have receipts in order, especially if they want, counseling, funeral expenses. They do have to get those receipts for reimbursement. So a judge can order an order of restitution directly to the person, the victim. So the judge would order have an order of restitution to the victim, not the victim, the perpetrator, to pay. This is sometimes very tricky because if the perpetrator is not working, that becomes a problem. But what the courts do is to actually make allowance for when the person works, and they can work out a treatment plan, a plan in which they can pay little by little until it's done, because restitution is a punishment, and therefore if they decide they're not paying it, then they're violating their punishment. Also, especially in the federal court, they can go after you for restitution for the next 20 years. I think after 20 years, they don't go after. In the state courts, it's a little different, but in the federal court, they can delay the restitution until you actually, if you're coming into money or tax, you're getting tax return, they can take that out of tax return. And there are different ways that the federal government can actually collect the restitution for the victim. Also, when if they're in fact incarcerated, they have restitution to be paid. That can be paid while they are incarcerated, if in fact they are actually working. I mean, it's not a lot they would work for in the prison, but they can literally start paying the restitution before they are actually released. Now, early this year, an Estonian man was sentenced to 66 months in prison for his year-long role in furthering and facilitating computer intrusion, the movement of fraudulently obtained goods and funds, and stolen financial account information. He was participating in ransomware attacks, causing over $53 million in losses, and he was ordered to pay $33 million in restitution to the victims. So they are actually enforcing this law. Now, another thing that the United States do is to seize we call it forfeiture of the person who's accused of the crime. So within the federal government, the Federal Litigation Unit works to uncover any assets the criminal may have that could be sold, seized, forfeited to satisfy the restitution debt. So they can seize their car, their houses, whatever is available that they possibly can seize. So liens on assets are enforceable for 20 years from the time that they are released from prison. So it means that if that person goes to prison for 20 years, the government can pursue them and use their assets to get money to pay restitution to the victims. Some cybercrime criminals try to use bankruptcy protection to make it harder for their victims to collect anything, but under federal law, they cannot file bankruptcy to discharge their legal obligation to pay court-ordered restitution or civil judgment. So some of them would declare bankruptcy with the hope that they wouldn't have to pay the restitution, but they will have to pay restitution because it is a sanction, and the US government would go after them, and the government can go after them for 20 years. So now, civil forfeiture. What is civil forfeiture? There are two kinds of forfeiture, criminal and civil. The former is part of a criminal case. The other is entirely separate civil action. Such orders are typically served upon civil institution and other having control of over here. Okay, so criminal forfeiture has to do with the crime, and then the civil has to do with it's a civil forfeiture, so you can have criminal but not necessarily civil, but you can have both of them. First, criminal forfeiture is unavailable if the defendant is dead, of course, because the criminal forfeiture is really on the person himself, or if he's a fugitive. So if the person is not around, then there's no civil forfeiture. Second, a majority of forfeiture cases are uncontested, often because the defendant sees no point in claiming property that connects him to the crime, him or her to the crime. Third, criminal forfeiture in a federal case requires a federal conviction. If defendant was convicted in a state court, the federal forfeiture must be a civil forfeiture. Fifth, criminal forfeiture is limited to the property of the defendant. So when the U.S. government goes after criminal forfeiture or civil forfeiture, it doesn't matter. It has to be the defendant. They cannot extend it to the family and other members of that particular individual. So we use both the forfeiture and the restitution. But there has been some criticism of the forfeiture. Both of them, they're very limited. And again, even though restitution may not even be paid, like we said before, somebody has property, they won't claim it because they don't want to be associated with it. Therefore, the government technically cannot go after it to sell it to give the victims. So one suggestion is that what the Congress should do, what the government should do, is to seize the property pre-trial, before they actually go to trial, and seize it just in case the person is found guilty. They have hold of the property, but you know, to address the situation, defend, so that they would have at least the property to sell it. I'm not sure the government can do that, but given our Constitution in the United States, that might just be problematic. Another argument is to some people do send criminals send their money abroad. The Congress should enact international restitution laws that facilitate the recovery of those assets that are abroad. Without these kinds of reform, the government will continue to struggle with collecting restitution because, as I said, some of the cyber criminals can evade restitution. And of course, they can hide their property, so the government cannot forfeit their property. Now, Canada also has restitution as well, and it's worked the same way as the United States and other countries that do have it.
To interfere here, Professor Joseph, because since
What's that?
I may need to interfere here, Professor Joseph.
Yes.
Yes. And you need to kindly wrap up within coming 5 minutes because we are running out of time. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, but Canada has something that's very interesting. They can legally freeze the cyber criminal assets, even if it's outside the country. Traditionally, they could not do it. It was limited to their jurisdiction, just Canadian. Now they have been able to have what I call a Mariva injunction. Actually, this is also used in the UK, and it is abroad. It's an international injunction where they can actually freeze defendant assets in order to prevent them from being spent, hidden, or moved from before a judgment is ordered. And usually it's the bank. If the money is in the bank, they actually go after the bank and basically seize the money. The bank cannot do anything about it just because that would be a violation. And so this is something that they're doing now. and they're able to get the money so they can give it to their victims. Just to wrap up now. Now compensation is a tricky one. United States do not give victims of cybercrime compensation. Same with Canada and Australia, because compensation is designed primarily for violent crimes, and cybercrime is not considered violent crime. And I think these countries should have legislation that define eligible victims of compensation, meaning that people who have been harmed, they should evaluate how these individuals are harmed. I think because they're victim of cybercrime, financial crime, the assumption is that they're not harmed, but yes, they're harmed and they do suffer trauma. And it's really, they should really reassess victims of cybercrime, and they should be actually included in compensation, and not confine compensation simply to violent crimes. Yeah. Finish? That's it. Stop me.
Thank you so much, Professor Joseph. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yes.
Yes. So one very crucial information that we get from Professor Joseph is compensation to the victims of cyber crimes is something which we need to look at from the state's point of view also. We will come back to you, Professor Joseph, for more questions. Now I move to Professor Xin Ren. Professor Ren, you have got 10 minutes time, and the platform is yours, Professor.
Professor Xin Ren, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Halder. And I can just continue what Janice just presented. And she gave a definition for cybercrime, and I don't have to repeat that. And she also explained how the reparation of a victim of cybercrime in the United States, the legislation and the penal code and the criminal proceeding and the civil proceeding. And as she mentioned that, and the compensation in the U.S. and doesn't provide compensation or any reparation and for victim of non-violent cybercrime. And since my research area focus on violent crime against children, and I wanted to discuss something else, and Janice did not cover. And I want to go back to one or two more steps before assisting victim of cybercrime. And number one is that identifying victim of cybercrime and remain a big challenge for law enforcement agencies. And without properly identify victim of cybercrime, and it's impossible to talk about reparation and compensation for victim of cybercrime. And I can use two examples to discuss that. Second point I wanted to make is that the current traditional criminal justice agencies is not very well equipped and to deal with and to help victim of cybercrime. And they're traditionally trained to investigate and making arrests against criminals on the street. And they're not equipped and with expertise and adequate training and to investigate sophisticated financial crime, especially those financial crime happen on the internet. And the third point I wanted to make is that the victim compensation or reparation is not a priority for current law enforcement agencies. It's not on their criminal investigation prosecution agenda. And so that is not a priority. And even for victimologists, we work very hard in the past 50 years and try to promote victim assistance and compensation reparation for victim of crime. But unfortunately, law enforcement and criminal justice agencies have a different agenda, different priority and for their job. And therefore, reparation is not on their agenda, or they have a very limited manpower and the resources, and to work with the victims and to provide reparation. And the fourth point I wanted to make is that personally, I'm quite disappointed and just look through the criminal proceeding, how to provide a reparation for victim of cybercrime. And I do not have much confidence, and therefore I actively advocate for civil proceeding and civil litigation against criminals and against those institutions and corporations which provide the breeding ground and offensive ground and for those cybercrime. And so victims should go after those corporate collaborators and in order to get a reparation and recover their financial losses. And for doing so, victims require a lot of lawyers support. And therefore, for those people teach at the law school and in legal education, they should encourage their students and to devote their time, their service for pro bono services. And most victims are poor. They do not have financial resources to hire a lawyer and to help them with the civil litigation. And I wanted to also to give you some general discussion and about the challenges in assisting victims of cybercrime. And since the internet become widely available in the global community, cyber technology has provided enormous power and the magic to people around the world for commerce and the financial investigation, global marketing, education, healthcare, and the information exchange. Unfortunately, criminals have also taken advantages of internet technology to pursue new criminal activities. As it's reported by the law enforcement agencies around the world, phishing, cyber extortion, data breaching, identity theft, and harassment are the top 5 cybercrime in the global community. Up to 2021, 153 countries have enacted cybercrime legislation in order to curb this type of criminal activities. Currently, many financial, educational, and government institutions, insurance company, and law enforcement have established the structure, mechanism to report and investigate phishing mails, identity theft, and cyber extortion. Like my university, for faculty's email, and there is a button on the ribbon, and you can click that to report phishing email. And so that's very convenient. Unfortunately, for those public emails servers, and they have not provided this type of tracking and reporting system. And however, in the near future, and that will be possible because it's already happening in the field, in the practice. And I also wanted to mention that, and there are 2 examples I wanted to illustrate the 4 points and I wanted to make. And the first one is internet and the dark net child pornography, sexual abuse, and sex trafficking. In the past 2 years, and I have been collecting information from U.S. federal prosecutors' daily digest on child pornography. That was my original purpose, and to collect such data. However, in the data collection process, I was surprised to discover some interesting factor in child pornography cases. Number one, many child pornography cases are not limited to possession, purchasing, production, and distribution of child pornographic materials, but also involve child sexual abuse, recruiting and trafficking minors for sexual exploitation, and the production of child pornography via internet. As many local and federal law enforcement agencies set up their high-tech investigation unit to catch those offenders who are involved in child pornographic crime and the prosecution of child pornography cases has skyrocketed in the recent years. While we are pleased with this improvement, it also appears that child pornography is the only end product of a chain of criminal activity against children, such as child sexual abuse, molestation, and rape, and sex trafficking. There are only a small number of such cases where the child pornography is prosecuted at the same time with the child sexual abuse and the sex trafficking. And why those child abuse and child sex trafficking not prosecuted at the same time with the child pornography? And possibly is that they have a difficulty to identify the victim of child sexual abuse. And to identify victim and encourage victim to testify against the perpetrator create an enormous workload for law enforcement agency. That's why most federal law enforcement agencies simply just go after those offenders involved in child pornography. And even from the investigation, they realize that that particular offender also involved in child sexual abuse and sex trafficking, and that they just simply skip that part and only go after the offender for child pornography. And so that is a stunning discovery and in law enforcement practice and the prosecution and against child pornography. And second point I want to mention is that although the U.S. has a large consumer market for child pornography, 90% of child pornography internet sites are registered and operated in foreign countries, and they're not registered or operated in the United States. And today, globalization does not appear to be as popular as 5 years ago, 10 years ago. However, in crime reduction and prevention and in child protection, global coalition and internationally concerted effort remain the critical measure and to curb violent crime against child pornography and sex violence against children around the world. And without such a global cooperation, and it is impossible and to eliminate and to reduce sex violence against children on the internet and the dark net. From clinical study, it is clear that child...
Professor Ren, I'm so sorry to interrupt you again. Due to the paucity of time, we have to limit the...
okay, I got it. And
yes,
from
yes.
clinical study, and it is clear that child pornography is a facilitating or intermediating factor relating to serious violent crimes such as assault and rape. And however, we do not know to what extent child pornography has reinforced the sex predators' motivation and the immediate criminal intent to victimize children for sexual and financial purposes. And lack of study and is the major challenge and for identifying and assisting victims of child pornography and where internet. Since the male the dominating consumers in child pornography market and adult pornography remains legal in many Western and Eastern countries, and the lack of government will and the legal determination to curb child pornography cannot be underestimated. And so this is a big challenge and for assisting victims of child pornography. And second example I want to mention that and is cyber internet financial fraud. And Asian criminal organized crime group and conspiring with financial institution that legitimately registered and operating in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, and Taiwan to trade on world stock market. And they hire many of those day traders in the U.S. and to use an investment scam fraudulent financial planning and a romantic scam to lure potential investor to make an investment in in cryptocurrency in Asian American community, and then they freeze their account to take over the fund in those accounts. And in a recent experimental study, when the victim reported their victimization of a financial fraud to local and federal law enforcement agencies, and only 1 out of 11 agencies they reported actually responded to the victim's complaint. And that response is not an investigation follow-up, but simply to provide a referral information and for reporting. And so you can see, and both the local, state, and the federal law enforcement agency, a lack of adequate expertise and support, and for victim to report those financial crime and committed via internet. And so that is a reality, and we're talking about a victimization and financial fraud today. And without to identify those victims, and without to establish the case for investigation, and there is impossible to talk about a reparation for victim of cybercrime. And
Absolutely, Professor. Unfortunately, we have to stop here for your presentation because we are running out of time, Professor. So I have one question to you, Professor Xin Ren. You have discussed about the child pornography and also adult pornography. And you have also discussed about the jurisdiction issues that, many cases are being reported from other countries also. I wanted to check one thing, that when there are jurisdictional issues, the website host or the web host is basically based out of or in US. So is there anything like, victim compensation, etc., that are being considered? Because I do understand, as Professor Joseph said, and also you mentioned about the victim compensation, which is the least priority for the courts in the US or in Canada also. But when we look at the web host or web companies as the hosts for keeping these contents, are there any cases that are being registered in the US or in Canada or in any other Western countries where the web companies are being prosecuted for not complying with the laws, especially when we see from the basic principles of justice for victims, especially vulnerable victims?
Jurisdiction is a big issue in investigating cybercrime, and especially these are very often involve transnational crime group. And I can speak for human trafficking law in the United States, and the U.S. Congress passed the anti-trafficking law in year of 2000, and that law was reauthorized 4 times already. And one of the provisions under this anti-trafficking law is to allow law enforcement agencies to have what is called extraterritorial jurisdiction. So that means law enforcement agency can negotiate with the foreign law enforcement agency and to request their assistance in order to make arrest or to set up investigation posts in foreign country. For example, Cambodia is the country famous for child predator to go there and to purchase sex from underage children. And FBI set up this monitor post in Cambodia, and to monitor American tourists entering this country, especially for those registered sex offender. And when they enter the country, and their passport will be registered with the Border Control Agency. And then the FBI will follow up those registered sex offender if they're there for sex tourism. And they can be arrested by the Cambodia law enforcement agency and then brought back to the United States for trial. And so that is called extraterritorial jurisdiction for U.S. law enforcement agency. And last year, there's another interesting case development between China and Cambodia. As China heavily crack down those internet financial fraud within the country, and many of those Chinese organized group, and they migrate to a foreign country in Asia, such as Cambodia, Philippines, and Myanmar, and to set up their operation there. And last year, there's a case reported in the newspaper and also broadcast on the television. And Chinese law enforcement successfully cooperated with the Cambodia law enforcement agency. They raided this office building and arrested 1,600 criminals in a single raid. And they have to hire several charter jets and to bring those offenders back to China to stand trial for financial fraud. And unfortunately, even they successfully arrest those criminals, and compensation for victim or recover the financial losses for victim is not a priority for Chinese law enforcement agencies.
Absolutely. It's not only for China, but worldwide. This is what we are getting to see, that victim compensation, especially for cybercrime victimization, becomes a big question, and thereby we do understand that the victims of cybercrimes, especially the vulnerable victims, they're going on the other way to get the lost property, especially in terms of reputation or in terms of the lost amount that they have lost. Thank you so much, Professor Xin Ren. Now we move to Dr. Nair. Dr. Nair has worked extensively on financial criminal victimization on the cyberspace. So the platform is yours, Dr. Nair.
Thank you, Professor Halder, and I wish to say
10 minutes would be given before you start your lecture. I'm extremely sorry for giving you the limitation. 10 minutes, please.
Sure, not an issue. So thank you, Professor Halder, and I would also want to thank Professor Xin Ren because she has set a foundation in terms of talking about fraud and financial victimization. So I'll talk on that because my research for past 3 to 4 years have been dedicated on that, and I have even teaching various courses on financial fraud, financial victimization. So just to share certain facts and talk about what all fraud aspect and fraud victimization is happening, and specifically talking about different aspect associated to compensation and restitution that is there in India and even across the globe. So first of all, when you talk about fraud and financial crime, the World Economic Forum has stated that the fraud and financial crime as an industry is a $1 trillion industry. And there has been various studies which have pointed out that every institution who spends or any kind of fraud where there's a $1 fraud, it nearly costs approximately $3 to the institution. So $1 is the cost, and there are allied costs that are associated. Even banks and financial institutions, when they are going forward to associate different kinds of program where the diverse factor, including vulnerability of fraud and financial crime, there is a need of digitization and automation. So countries who are least developing or who are developing, that is a challenge for them, because right now when we focus on digitization or internet sensationalization, that is a challenge because there are countries who are well developed, who are ahead of us, and that creates a gap in terms of how we can create any kind of forum to challenge people who are facing certain kind of issues, especially financial crime in an internet space. And when you talk about cyber crime, it's not only about hacking, it's not only about identity theft. Now we have outgrown, and there are also aspect of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, as Professor Xin Ren also talked about, that has created to change certain rules. Recently in India, we have seen that the government have now taxed the cryptocurrency and the blockchain technology gains as 30%, because now they have seen that that is an emerging trend, and there are crimes which are happening over that in terms of various kind of sanctions coming up, various kind of taxation, and possibly there would be regularization that would be coming in. So talking about financial crime, in the domain of financial crime, where we have regulators, number of countries have regulated, India have also started to come under the regulatory aspect. There are revision and rules. There are different kind of crimes which are happening, aligning with them. As Professor Xin Ren also mentioned, human trafficking. That's something that we cannot avoid financial crime with. Human trafficking, money laundering, and even terrorist financing that is happening aligning with financial crime. That's a key that every government, every organization and institution has to go forward with. And government have also need to look into various kind of economic sanctions. They have to also look about countries who are focusing on it. I would say in last 5 years or 7 years, we have also heard there are specific countries who are working towards phishing, who are working towards different kind of phishing, wishing, and various kind of malicious malwares which are there. That is also a key where not just the government, but also the public and private entities in a country needs to focus on. And individuals come, that's a micro level, I would say, awareness and management that needs to be done. But on a macro level, there is a need of reformation. There's a need of revision in rules and regulation, and regulatory authority needs to look on those aspects also. So institution needs to find various approaches, and we need to revise, I won't say every year, but it needs every month per se. Why? Because technology is developing every now and then. Few years back, nobody focused on blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, and other specific AI-based things. But today, it's a need of an hour. A lot of people are investing, and I will just quote one example. Recently, there was a fraud, which I think 5 days back over a blockchain technology, where a fraud was committed for $615 million. This was on a platform which was Axie Infinity, and wherein this platform helps in transfer of cryptocurrency in different kind of blockchain technology, where the hacker, this was a case on March 23rd, they stole 173,000 Ether coins and 25.5 million USD coins. So this is not a very menial amount. A lot of government are not even focusing on it because they have their set traditional values that they need to look into. But this is the need of the hour where we need to talk about financial victimization, aligning with various development that is happening. Second point that I want to make upon, then I will go towards the reparation and regulatory authority, which is a distinction between fraud and financial crime. A lot of time we are confused to understand that does fraud come under financial crime, or fraud is a broader term per se. But in terms of detection, prevention and prosecution, many institutions have started distinction between fraud and financial crime. I agree that the boundaries are very thin, very blurred, but in case of the emerging cyber threat, where we have seen criminal activity becoming more complex and more interrelated, it is important for us to distinguish based on law. It is important for us to distinguish based on regularization and regulators, that what can come under fraud and what can come under financial crime, especially for organization. Financial crime, generally what we look into is money laundering, various kind of criminal transgression associated with bribery, tax evasion, even a certain kind of malicious or misuse of financial services, which again are in support of criminal organization and enterprises. But it is a compliance issue. When we talk about financial institution, they have various fines in terms of money laundering, anti-money laundering activity. But on the other hand, when we talk about fraud, it is an intentional deception of financial personnel or services, wherein it could be theft, it could be skimming, it could be any kind of billing scheme, various elements where organization, individual, and subsequently going on to the government scenario also that has been put forward. So financial institution have to approach fraud as a loss problem where there is a need for reparation and compensation. And right now there are various kind of softwares, there is various kind of AI-based equipment that aligns to track the money trail, that allows to understand various aspects of criminals. Recently, we have also started to function on understanding the forensic toolkit, where we are trying to devise how we can assist and consult various organizations to extract or to have cloning of various softwares in terms of money trail, in terms of bank statement, how that can be worked upon. And there are softwares where through artificial intelligence, we can track down where the money trail is leading. And especially even through various kind of forensic interviews, we have started our lab here to understand layered voice analysis. When we do various kind of forensic interview, to understand, is the individual anxious when he is giving? This is way before polygraph. So I will not confuse layered voice analysis with polygraph, because both are complementing in nature. You can start before and conduct layered voice analysis to understand the victimization, even with the financial victims, in terms of what they are going through, what all is happening with them. Are they stressed? Because a lot of time we have seen that there are certain kind of victimization where there is a missing incident. As Professor Xin Ren mentioned, they would not want to go forward and report it. May it be unaccounted money, or maybe it's a million money, because there are a number of cases where people have not gone and reported the crime. And that's one of the key element where I would also want to talk about the regulations and regulatory mechanism is missing incidents. That's when we talk about the figure of dark crime. This also comes into picture, because we are just feeding onto the impunity. If we are not reporting the said crime, it will just lead for the hacker, for the criminal to just commit the crime again and again. So that's one of the element where for individuals, I would suggest that we need to go forward and report every crime. May it be $1 or 100 rupees. That $1 that goes in might be very menial for an individual, but if it goes for billions of transaction, it creates a lot in terms of amount and also the gravity. And again, as Professor Xin Ren mentioned, phishing cases, clicking on malicious link, using public Wi-Fi's and all, that's a key where one needs to be very careful, one needs to be very alert, because that would just lead to various kind of financial victimization. But my key here would be, rather than going into the micro level, going into meso and macro level to understand about the institutional level, cyber security is a key. As Professor Xin Ren mentioned, that we have to work upon various kind of malware, various kind of softwares where we can detect any kind of external threat. Even every institution, made irrespective of any industry, may it be academic, may it be banking sector, any financial institution, one thing is key, that cyber security is a very important thing. Again, awareing people, advocating people that yes, this is something that you need to incorporate in your day-to-day life would be a challenge, but it is a key at that point. Second thing that I would want to mention is a third-party trust. A lot of us as an institution, as an organization, we work in collusion with various third party. Having that kind of third party trust, making contracts wherein our data would not be breached, our data would not be sold, is a key, because that's also financial victimization, because you will get calls from a third party stating that XYZ has happened. Please fill these kind of forms, these kind of website, and that subsequently lead to various kind of malicious incident. Lastly, I want to point out on a macro level where compensation and repatriation would be important, and even the kind of restoration for financial victims would be key, is government policies. In India, especially when you talk about victims of financial crime in the cyberspace, the kind of schemes and policies that we are is still in a very gray area. I'll not deny that individuals and organizations who face financial victimization in cyberspace are haywire to understand where they can get compensation. So there should be a dedicated governmental structure. There should be a policy framework which could create awareness, advocacy. And yes, there should also be in every institution or organization a risk management program wherein employees, the students also, if I talk about higher education institution, the students should also be aware, as we were discussing, that there should be courses which should give them basic understanding of what actually is fraud, financial crime, and how at least they can prevent it. If not on a macro level, but at least if they can prevent one victim of financial crime, that would be a great help to the society. Because if 1 billion or 7 billion people can at least prevent one or the other individuals, surely that will create a greater impact. So with that, I would wish to wind up, and I'll be happy to discuss with all the stalwarts in to get more awareness about
Absolutely, Dr. Nair. I would like to also share here that my recent research on this cryptocurrency and cyber victimology, there I have pointed out that there are several guardianless victims who are becoming victims because of cryptocurrency related issues, including the lack of government policy. You are absolutely correct, and I completely agree with you. And again, going back to Professor Janice Joseph, what she mentioned we are also getting to see that in the cryptocurrency market, many women are also entering. And unfortunately, they're also becoming guardianless victims. And obviously, there is loss of property, loss of reputation, etc. And as you have correctly mentioned that, from the third party, there are lots of data mining, data stealing is also happening, for which I believe, and obviously all of us in this session, we all should agree to this point that it is not only the stakeholders, that is the domestic stakeholders or the international stakeholders, but the actual thing is that, we both international and domestic stakeholders should work hand in hand. Thank you so much for all three panelists, Professor Joseph, Professor Xin Ren, and also Dr. Nair. I now open the session for question answers from the participants. If you have any questions, we will be putting one by one questions to the eminent panelists, and we request the panelists to answer them.
Any question from the audience, please? Ma'am, if I may take the liberty to ask few questions. My first question is to Dr. Vipin Vijay Nair, sir. You just mentioned about the compensation, and we are talking about the victim compensation. So where do you see the provision can lie when it comes to the victims of the cyber crime, sir? Because there is no provision in the information technology law. This is my first question. Second question is pertaining to the anonymity when it comes to the dark web, sir. And my third question is in regard to what you just mentioned, that, by using the internet, we are indulging in crimes like transnational organized crimes. We are looking at the tax evasion. But all these things, they are dealt with under different laws, sir. There are special legislations. So they are looked at as financial crimes, and they are never paid attention from the perspective of being a cyber crime itself. So I have these three questions. If you could kindly throw some light on these. Thank you.
Surely. Thank you very much. First thing that I mentioned when we're talking about various kind of financial crime, one element is that we surely have different kind of organized crime, transnational crime in various laws. But when we are focusing on transnational crime specific to cyberspace, we have seen a Nigerian perspective of crime where there are phishing and different kind of aspect. It becomes difficult for us to track down. Even though there are various kind of cases that we have seen, especially in Bangalore police, I want to highlight the Bangalore cyber police. They have tracked down various kind of dark web cases where there were organized crime, where there were drug smuggling and arms trafficking, which was happening. So one of the key is how we can tackle, if I may add on to it, is that we have investigators, we have police personnel, but what we need right now is virtual investigators, people who are well aware with different scenarios, especially where they know what is cyberspace, what all could be various elements associated with the laws, the compensation, different kind of strategies which needs to be done, and they should be well versed with the new technologies. What I have mentioned, I also mentioned money laundering, terrorist financing, various elements associated with tax evasion, but those are acts, as you mentioned, that are covered in various acts. But what about blockchain technology? What about cryptocurrencies? What about various aspects associated with coins? They are not there in our laws, but still financial crimes are happening on those elements. So it's not just about one key element where there are money laundering, which is covered under PMLA, and different acts are there. But because of the financial victimization and the anonymity which you have mentioned, it creates a lot of hindrance that we are not able to track down. So one thing, as I mentioned, is having a virtual investigators team in different police personnel cell in different states and even different countries, not just talking about Indian per se, but across the globe, that should be there, and having experts who are well versed with that, so that the policy can be revised. As Dr. Halder has mentioned, we does not only need a micro level strategy, but it needs to be a macro level strategy as every point. I hope that answered all three questions. I took it as a cumulative response.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I see a few questions in the chat box. So the first question is for Professor Joseph. The question is how restitution is executed in US. Professor, if you would please answer.
Yes. First of all, restitution is at the sentencing process. Once a person is about to be sentenced and there's a victim impact statement, the victim impact statement should include the restitution. And the judge can decide to give it or not, but it's usually based on income. And as I said before, if the person is unemployed at the time, because it's an additional, by the way, it's an additional punishment. The person might be sentenced to probation with restitution, or even incarceration with restitution. So it's an additional added form of sanction against that individual. If the person is unable to pay it at the time, an agreement can be worked out between that individual and the court as to how that person would pay it. Once a person gets a job, they can pay it weekly, bi-monthly, etc. It can be delayed at the federal level. It can be delayed if pending future earnings or pending something getting inheritance getting in the future. So the idea is to make the person pay for the crime that he or she has committed, and also to make the victim, we use the phrase, make the victim whole. It doesn't really make the victim whole, but it does make the victim feel that he or she has received something in for the crime that is against, especially when it comes to cybercrime, where a lot of victims lose a lot of money. At least they give them the opportunity to provide them something, some kind of restitution, something to make them feel that, they're compensated.
Okay, thank you, Professor. The next question is for Professor Xin Ren. The question is how cybersecurity may be working to protect children specifically, other than blocking the websites.
Now, in many U.S. local law enforcement agencies, they all established a high-tech unit, and this high-tech unit specializes in internet monitor for crime against children. And sometimes the police officer posed as underage minor, and to attract those sex predators. And they have been very successful to operate this kind of investigation operation, and to catch those sex offenders against children. And also for many countries, and they have produced educational material for school, and to educate the parents and the children, and be aware of alert news and approach and the game, and that may lure children into a sex crime. I saw some of those cartoon strips produced by UNICEF office in Beijing, and to distribute that among kindergarten and elementary school, and they also provided those material to parents and educate parents about the internet safety and how they monitor and the children's safety, and through the supervision, and simply deny children's access to internet is not working in the reality. And also for some, many children also addicted to the internet games, and how parents can monitor children's access to those internet games, and has become big headache for many parents in Asia. Simply tell the children, and you cannot use the internet, and you are not allowed to play those games. It's not working. That is simply not working. And the positive direction of providing some additional educational material, and let the children know ahead of time for those dangerous signs, and that is helpful. And of course, and this is just a beginning area, and for crime prevention, there are more work needed to be done. And as I mentioned that, and like many educational institutions, and they could set up some kind of internet security monitor or reporting mechanism just on the homepage, and easily for user and to report suspicious internet criminal activities. And my university has done great job, and for faculty and the student to report those phishing emails, and it has been really successful.
Thank you so much, Professor. I request the audience, if you want to ask any question, you can even unmute yourself and ask the question, or raise your hands. We can ask you one by one. Till then, Professor Vipin, there's another question for you. This question is by Manoj Meena, and he writes that in most of the reported cases, the police is not able to identify the child victims and consequently unable to decide the age also. In such circumstances, what are the solutions to identify and reparate the victims of cyber child pornography?
Okay, talking about cyber child pornography, in my knowledge and my understanding, if I would want to add on, that there are cases where in different countries, there are different strategies and techniques which are there. And when we talk about the age group, again, we have to focus on the dedicated, I would say, age documents which are there. But the strategies which needs to be put forward to restrict child pornography, as Professor Xin Ren also added on, is again having certain kind of governmental strategies. It's not just upon a micro level that we can work upon to restrict any kind of child pornography, but the age limit, which would differ from country to country, where in India there will be a set age and there will be set age in other countries. That is a tough challenge to decipher in order to create any kind of blocking. I'll be happy if Professor Xin Ren would want to add on, because I think the research is majorly aligning with Professor Xin Ren's talk.
Professor Xin Ren, if you would like to add anything to this debate.
I wanted to say that, to prevent children from becoming a victim of child pornography, and I don't know other countries, but in the United States, prevention of sex crime or investigation sex crime is exclusively a local jurisdiction. So the local police need to be alert, and really needed to devote the resources and set up their institutional mechanism and to catch this type of criminal activity. And I also wanted to mention that current law enforcement agencies is mainly targeted those people purchase, possession, and distribution of pornographic materials, and they rarely to go after those criminal offender who victimize, sexually assault child, and then make a videotape and distribute that. And law enforcement had a technical difficulty, and to catch those criminal offenders in the early stage. And by the time they seize those pornographic material, and that is end of the product of this chain of sex violence against children. And so that's why law enforcement agency needed to be more proactive and to set up their investigation and do undercover work, and in order to catch those criminal offenders. And I also wanted to mention that, and in the anti-child pornography campaign, and this is the same thing also on pornography. And in many countries, pornography is for adult is legal, and so that's why the government and the institution lack of will and to prevent this type of crime. And because the majority of those customers are males, and they dominate most social institution, financial institution, government agencies in many countries. And so therefore have to address the demanding side of this criminal activity is remain unresolved issue. And same thing for the prostitution issue. And very often most countries' law enforcement only target those women involved in prostitution. They hardly ever address the customer, those junks and patrons for prostitution. And why they cannot do that? Because many of those customers, and they're in high prestigious social position, they're lawyers and they're judges and they're police officers, they're university professors and they're doctors and they're dentists, and how are you going to target them? And they have enormous political, social, financial power in the society, and that is the problem. And this is not a unique problem just for developing country, and this is also a reality in the United States. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Another question is for Professor Janice. The question is there any international resolution for victim detection, assistance, and retribution for all nations to work closely and efficiently? Professor, please unmute yourself. I'll repeat the question for you.
Yes, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Is there any international resolution for victim detection, assistance, and retribution for all nations to work closely and efficiently?
Well, I mean, it has been really, really difficult to get the nations to work together because of jurisdictional issues. And as you asked that question, I remember the whole notion about stalking, cyber stalking, and there were cases where it was difficult to determine where the crime was committed and where it's coming from, even though they know it's coming from this place, who should be prosecuted, because each state or each country has its own laws. That would have been ideal if we could get one, all these countries working together and have one jurisdictional law. But that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. That's why so many of the cyber criminals escape punishment, because the countries, because there is jurisdictional restrictions. So it's really difficult. So for example, if you have one in India, for example, it's really difficult to get that person to come back to the United States, even though they may have defrauded a large number of people in the United States, because of jurisdictional restriction. So it's not happening. It's going to be a while. I mean, it's problematic.
Thank you so much, Professor. We'll take the last question, and the question is for Professor Xin Ren. The question is there any research on cybercrime against disabilities?
Yes, there are plenty of, I should say, and cybercrime against the people with a disability. And I do not know the direct victim of cybercrime and with a physical mental disability. However, in the human trafficking process, and there are many those physically, mentally disabled individuals become victim of labor trafficking, and that is for sure. And recently, there is also several interesting cases being investigated by both the Myanmar law enforcement agency and also Chinese law enforcement agency. When those people hired by financial institution to do the internet fraud and a fraudulent loan scam, and those workers are recruited, and either by deception or by coercion, and very often their passport is confiscated by the employer, and they're held in custody and without a personal freedom. And when those employees try to leave, and they become victim of forcible organ removal, and some of them being beaten and even killed. And so this is a type of traditional human trafficking cases happened in the process of internet financial scam. So I don't have specific research data on people with a mental disability. as a victim of internet crime. And I assume, because, well, I know people with physical disability and they can use the internet, and with people with mental disability and maybe they have a limited access to internet services. And currently, I'm not aware of any specific study being done on this group of people.
Thank you so much, Professor. I thank all the speakers for the day. Professor Dr. Janice Joseph, Professor Xin Ren, and Dr. Vipin Vijay Nair. Thank you so much for all the information that you have shared, and thank you so much for this interactive session. I request Professor Bajpai to say a few words, and then we close this session.
I actually just have to really thank you all the panelists today, and to make such a vibrant, wonderful, morning session with full of information and energy. So my particular thanks to Professor Janice, Xin Ren, and my very dear friend Dr. Vipin. And I can see also Professor Jiva is on the screen. Hello, and my good morning to you. Such a wonderful, to meet you on the screen, of course, and Dr. Kavita is also there. So it's such a pleasure to really host you for this colloquium, and without your help, it wouldn't have been possible. But I know that I have such a wonderful connect with all of you, and you are here because of my request. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to more and more involvement and participation to the activities of CCB. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Bajpai. Before everybody go, and I just want to make an announcement, and at the closing ceremony in this conference, and I will report and present the Victim Assistance Award this year. And I think someone just asked a question, and whether there's an international victim assistance. Yes, and Victim Support Asia provided this kind of award to victim of crime. And so I will be presenting those awards to those victims. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, everyone. We'll start with the session 2 at 12 p.m. So please stay back. Thank you.
Bye-bye.